Hello everyone, how are you doing? This is Rob of Rule of Two Review. Welcome back to the channel, and in a happy turn of events, we happen to be coming back to Metroid and Metroid Dread and discussing the future of the franchise. Now, as of today, Metroid Dread is officially 1 month old. That's right, it is November 8th, and as crazy as it is, it's been an entire month since Metroid Dread released. Of course, we all know why that's a big deal, and man, what can I say? I feel like I've been living in some sort of dream world, having played a brand new Metroid game and a Metroid game that was Metroid 5 only a couple of weeks ago, and I've obviously played through it a handful of times. I think many people seem to have been doing the same thing, and it's just like, dude, Metroid 5, Metroid Dread, I mean, it's real, it exists, we've played it, we've completed it, we've seen that story, we've understood the newest and most recent chapter in Samus's journey. We've also effectively seen what Nintendo and Sakamoto have called the end of the initial Metroid chapter, the Metroid saga, the story of Samus and her intertwined fates with the Metroids. We didn't really know what that was going to look like. It was a surprise when Metroid Dread was revealed and they told us that Metroid Dread was going to represent the end of that story. And initially maybe a little bit sad and scary, you know, worrying about where the future of the franchise would go. But around the same time, during E3, when the game was revealed, Sakamoto also said that, don't worry, there are more chapters and more story to tell. The series does not end with Metroid Dread, even though we are concluding the 5-part story. And now there's more insight into what they might actually be planning, and Sakamoto has had an interview with CNET where he specifically lays this out a little bit. And it's potentially very exciting stuff, and I want to talk to you guys about what it could mean for Metroid. Of course, before we dive any deeper into the Metroid topic, I like to always remind you guys that I am always trying to grow the channel here on Rule of Two Review. I upload every single week, I talk about all things Nintendo, I talk about everything Metroid, and I discuss all things gaming. So as you watch this video, if you seem to like what I'm doing and what you hear, then I hope you will consider subscribing to the channel. So what I probably don't need to do with you guys today is discuss any more about how much I love Metroid Dread and the reasons that I loved it. I made 2 full 25-minute reviews of the game and the ending. I also made a follow-up video discussing some theories about the X-Parasite and whatnot. And so I've kind of emptied my head of a lot of those thoughts. Now we're more into theory territory, speculation territory, kind of remembering why the game is so great, and also, of course, starting to get hyped for Metroid Prime 4, which we know is the next Metroid game that is still set to release in the future. So, at this point, we all love Metroid Dread. You guys know how much I love Metroid Dread. We instead start to look at what's actually being said about Samus the character, Metroid the franchise, and where Sakamoto and Nintendo see it going in the future. Now, there isn't really any discussion about Metroid Prime 4 specifically coming from this, although I myself will touch on it in this video and conversation. But let's quickly look at the quotes that Sakamoto gave to CNET in his interview about the series. CNET asks him, at E3 you commented that you know you want the series to continue, that you know you definitely wouldn't want it to end. Do you see Dread at all being a closure? Sakamoto responds, as long as the character Samus exists, I think her adventure will continue. I feel that Samus should continue her adventure, and that's something that we would really need to put our best effort into. Metroid Dread does conclude the 5-story arc that has been going on for 35 years. However, I feel that it's not the ultimate end. There should be something that is able to continue the franchise in the universe. So yes, as long as the character Samus is loved, I would like to do what I have to do. Now obviously this would have been translated into English, so maybe some of the sentence structure about what he said kind of came off a little bit awkward, but overall we could tell what he's trying to tell us, right? He's trying to say that, yes, Metroid Dread obviously concludes the 5-story arc that's been going on for 35 years. That does also include Other M, by the way, you haters. But despite the fact that Metroid Dread ends that 5-story arc, that there is still a future. He still loves Samus and the Metroid franchise. Nintendo obviously still is invested in it. They've given Retro Studios Metroid Prime 4 to work on and to restart and to still complete. So we know we still have another Metroid game in the future to look forward to. And clearly with the success of Metroid Dread, we haven't seen the sales numbers yet, but I think we all know it's been a massive success. So much social media buzz, everyone buying multiple copies, people playing it, people loving it. I mean, the game is actually good, which also helps more success come from this game. There's just no doubt that we know the Metroid series has to continue in some way. Now, I covered this many months ago, but back in June, again during some of the E3 interviews after Metroid Dread was officially announced and revealed, Sakamoto did talk about future chapters of the Metroid series, right? He talked about Samus' story continuing. He talked about what he was calling, quote, new chapters or the next chapter or what have you. And so I find it interesting that it seems like Nintendo is viewing Metroid Dread closing what they see as a chapter in the Metroid story. Again, Metroids 1 through 5. And within that timeline, the spin-off games like the entire Prime trilogy, the Prime handheld games, Other M, Federation Force, Pinball, all of these other games and the Prime and the Other M kind of story arc are part of the overall journey that Samus went on, but they are kind of side stories to the main 5-part saga, or chapter, that ended with Dread. But clearly, new chapters, whether that next chapter is called Metroid 6, or if they drop the numbers altogether, new chapters are clearly in the works. Sakamoto confirmed in June that they are already making these new chapters, or planning, or writing, or preparing for these new chapters. Does that tie into Metroid Prime 4 or the Metroid Prime story? Possibly, and that is also something that I want to talk about. I have another video and conversation that I'm planning for you guys around specifically this topic, but to touch on it briefly a little in this video, I think that the upcoming release of Metroid Prime 4, whenever that happens, is going to tell us a lot about what we can expect in a post-Metroid Dread Metroid Future. Because I think it's very important to note that the Metroid Prime story currently exists way in the past prior to the events of Metroid Dread, happening between Metroids 1 and 2. And so one might think that Metroid Prime 4 would also take place in the past. And in fact, more than likely, it probably will take place in the past. But I think that the fact that this game is now set to release after Metroid Dread, and that they made the decision to restart this game in 2019 after we now know Metroid Dread was already in development, means that they may have altered or changed or adjusted the story or the time that it takes place in to potentially occur after Metroid Dread. And the fact that, again, the game is now set to release well after Metroid Dread releases means, why would they choose to tell us a story that takes place in the past after they quote-unquote conclude the story of Samus and the Metroids with Metroid Dread? I seriously have to wonder if part of the plan and the rewrite of Metroid Prime 4 was to adjust it to account for the events of Metroid Dread, which again we know was in development at that time, and maybe the game is both releasing and taking place after Metroid Dread, potentially meaning that Metroid Prime 4 could represent the beginning, so to speak, of the new chapter of Samus' story. Now, I know that to a lot of my fellow Metroid diehards and the people who know the story, the games, Samus, the chronology of events just like I do, might think that it's just totally impossible and absolutely bananas to think that Metroid Prime 4 would take place after Metroid Dread. But I think that people are holding on too much to the fact that the trilogy takes place before Metroid Dread, but there is nothing holding the writers to that. There is nothing that says the writers have to be completely strangled and held back into the past with Metroid Prime 4. They could very easily write some sort of significant time jump between Prime 3 and Prime 4. Even if that includes the whole Sylux tease at the end of Prime 3, there's nothing that says the writers can't say that it took 10, 15 years for the events of Metroid Prime 4 to happen, and Sylux, Phazon, Dark Samus, whatever they do there, takes 10 to 15 years to come back into Samus's life after she's concluded the Dread story, after she's been infected, infused with the Metroid DNA and eventually become Metroid herself. All of this stuff could technically happen after Metroid Dread. And it's Samus herself and my personal investment in her, the character, that makes me truly believe this could be possible. But even if it's not, whether it's Metroid Prime 4 or whether it's something else, it's Samus who I focus in on, and you guys hear me talk about Samus a lot. I don't think enough other people, huge Metroid fans or Metroid YouTubers or whatnot, people on Twitter, talk enough about Samus the person and what she's gone through, and it's something I am just so clearly invested in and very much care about. And it will be another video that I make and maybe discuss in further detail. I don't want to waste too much time on that here. But I will say, because I think that the story of Samus the person and the woman is what's kind of being pushed to the forefront after Metroid Dread, I think that when we hear Sakamoto talk about the next chapters, whether we're talking about Prime 4, whether we're talking about a game they call Metroid 6, or whether we talk about something where they completely alter the nomenclature of the franchise going forward, I think that Samus's journey as a person in that narrative will become the focus. Whether the X-Parasite or Phazon, Space Pirates, Metroids, whatever is part of the story, what she goes through is where I think they're going to take these, quote, next chapters. And it's a very exciting future to me because I think it might mean that the narrative of Metroid might be pushed more to the forefront than it ever has before. And as somebody who cares about the story and cares about Samus and cares about the universe these games take place in, it makes me very excited. I don't want them to supplant gameplay for narrative. I still want the gameplay and the backtracking and the leveling up and the upgrades and all of that stuff to be at the forefront, but I do still like the idea of the story and the narrative being put more on equal footing with the gameplay. And I really wonder if Sakamoto is trying to tell us that that's part of what their plan is going forward. This is just how I kind of perceive some of what's being discussed here and what Sakamoto is saying. And, you know, it's worth noting, you know, to summarize here, and also like I brought up in this video, that he's been saying this ever since the game was announced back in June. There's a couple of quotes and interviews and even some of the stuff that he said in that development history kind of little 6-minute video that they put out. He's been basically doubling down on this since we knew Metroid Dread / Metroid 5 was a real game. That this ends the 5-part story and basically the first chapter of Samus's journey, but that new chapters are already in the works. He basically said, you know, please look forward to the next chapters because we're basically working on them. And he's just doubling down on that and saying, as long as people care about Metroid, as long as people care about Samus, he specifically calls out Samus in these quotes, then I'll be here and Nintendo will be here to help shepherd Metroid as a franchise and Samus as a character into a new era and continue the story. If people like her, if they like Metroid, we're gonna keep making these games. Which is the lesson we've all been trying to learn, which is buy and support Metroid games. So these are my interpretations. What do you think about the quotes and everything that they're saying? What do you think about my personal interpretation of it? What do you expect from the future of Metroid? When do you think we'll see Prime 4? When will Prime 4 take place? Will Prime 4 relate to Metroid Dread? Again, I'll discuss that in depth on a future video, but I want to hear your thoughts now. So, yeah, I guess that's all I have to say for this right now. Thanks, of course, as always, for tuning in, guys. This is Rob of Rule of 2 Review, and I'll catch you next time on another video.